today's show, it's going to be a slightly unusual one. We've talked about this in the past on our wonderful podcast WhatsApp group for our Patreon subscribers. And one of the things they wanted to hear was us interview each other. And so it is with great privilege and pleasure that I have got today on the podcast my very dear friend and regular co-host. I say not irregular. You are the co-host, but I'm trying to make it separate. But today, my guest is none other than Greg Funnell. Greg, how are you?
Well, can I just say thank you for having me on our show?
No, it's honestly, it's my pleasure to have you on. I'm so glad you could make it.
This is weird.
It is slightly odd, isn't it? No, but it's gonna be good because I feel like I know you quite well. So if you do say a bullshit answer, I will call you out on it straight away.
You've got a klaxon ready. Yeah, good.
So, but no, I actually, as soon as somebody suggested this, I've been looking forward to doing this for ages because, bluntly, before we started working together on the show, I thought your work was amazing. I mean, sorry, hang on, I just realised how that sounded.
You went downhill.
For the record, I've been a terrible influence. No, I think you are still an incredible photographer. I think, you are a true talent and also one of the nicest people I think I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. So it would be my honour and privilege to interview you. So I think, honestly, I think we start here.
You're not going to be getting this treatment next week, Tom. Do
you know what, Greg? I'm not going to lie. I don't doubt it, but I thought I'd go in really hard on the compliments just to try and get something from you. But yeah, listen. I mean, let's go back to when Greg was 2-3 years old. How did it all start?
My journey into photography. I actually have a very embarrassing photo of me as a child squatting in my garden with my shoes on the wrong feet, holding a camera that I clearly wasn't using. It was an old Ilford Sportsman little rangefinder type thing. I think it was my granddad's.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have it somewhere at home. But I was obsessed with the idea of cameras as a kid. And maybe in the way that our children will be obsessed with the idea of phones because they see adults with phones all the time. It's a horrible thought, isn't it? And maybe as a kid, I saw my dad with a camera and thought, I want a camera. But yeah, if I'm being serious, I mean, I played around with a camera and used it as a toy when I was a kid, but I never really picked up a camera until I was probably in my later teenage years, and I had an old Yashica, I believe it was, and then progressed on to a Chinon and then a Pentax Super ME. But my first camera, the Yashica, was my dad's SLR. I remember putting a roll of film through it, going to the local skate park and probably shooting everything at 30th of a second and then being really annoyed when I got the film back and everything was just blurred and unusable. Being like, this is rubbish. I don't think I really bit of this. And I kind of put it away for a while and then picked it up again in secondary school when there was a kid in my class, Duncan, who really got into photography. We had a darkroom at school, but we didn't have a photography module. I was studying art, was really into art, and every spare moment that I had, all my free periods, I'd be in the art department painting or drawing, or in the DT department making things. So I was very kind of hands-on. I liked creating things. And photography, once I got shown how to use a darkroom by my physics teacher, Mr. Tansey, and by my mate Duncan, I was hooked. Like, seeing that, it's an age-old story, really, for anyone who grew up in that era of using film and working in a darkroom at all. But that first time you see a picture, coming out in Developer, it's just like, it's magic, it's pure magic. And, because we didn't have any photography modules at school, the darkroom was basically just free all the time. So me and Duncan had, free reign over that thing. And I went from spending all my free time in the art department to spending all my free time working through lunchtimes, etc., in the physics department in the darkroom, just inhaling those wonderful, wonderful chemicals, glaring out of the gloomy red light, like some kind of weird golem. I loved it. It felt very, very like my natural home. And I think paired around that time, I also I worked in a library and I started to pick up photography books. And I saw again, God knows how many people have gone this exact same route of our age, but I think I picked up a Don McCullum book that was, a kind of compendium of his work throughout the late 20th century. So it covered everything: Biafra, Vietnam, Lebanon, various other conflicts in the Congo that he covered. Across Africa and Cyprus. I mean, he covered most of the major conflicts apart from the Falklands, because I didn't allow him to go. Because by that point, he'd made such a name for himself that the MOD were like,
absolutely not.
Absolutely not. You're going to lose us the war. So I picked up one of his books. I think what really affected me was looking at these images that were from these points in history. So I was a bit of a history nerd anyway. So for me to be looking at something that was historical, it was a historical document, but also had the power to kind of stop me in my tracks and make me want to know more about what I was looking at and want to know the stories of the people in the pictures and just the power that had. I found it incredibly powerful. And I guess I was already a visually minded person because of my interest in art. So a mix of kind of interest in art, interest in history, I was just like, wow, this is it. I want to do photojournalism. That's what I want to be when I grow up. And as life has a way of doing, that didn't really transpire that way. But it certainly was the origins of my journey into photography. And I still think to this day influences the work I make and the way I make work and the way I shoot. I think I'm much more of a observational photographer and somebody who reacts to what I see rather than somebody that kind of creates something from nothing. I think I've been told I am somebody who's quite observant in general, probably to a fault. I don't miss a trick, but I think that's just an inquisitive nature and a slightly introverted nature, which lends itself to being quite good at observed photography. And so, yeah, that's kind of the origins of my trajectory. I then went off to university and didn't study photography. I studied history and war studies. And I guess that kind of led to I was interested. I knew I wanted to do photography. I just had no way of doing it. So that's kind of where I was at when I was heading off into the world.
So when you graduated, obviously from your war studies, was there pressure to go off and do something and utilize that degree, or were you kind of hell bent? You were like, no, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give this photojournalism thing a go, or I'm just going to go off and be a photographer. How did that work for you?
So I when I was at university, I started working for the student newspaper. I was quite cocky, and I went up to the editor, I think, within my first week of being at uni, and was like, what your newspaper needs is a good photographer. Photography is a bit rubbish.
Guy.
Yeah. And I basically made myself a job. I ended up becoming the photo editor for the paper and then the editor in the final year, along with a few friends. But it also, because it was a London-based university, we had access to all sorts of things on our doorsteps. We had interesting speakers come to the university. We had amazing gigs in the venues. So actually covering it as a photographer for a newspaper in inverted commas, was a really good grounding experience because I was kind of trying everything. I was turning up to protests. I was doing portraits. I was photographing events. I was photographing gigs. I was doing a bit of everything. And so that was a really good way of kind of teaching me the ropes, really. And
this was just as social media was kind of starting to kind of appear, right?
Yeah. So this was 2003 to 2006, and I think Facebook first came to universities around 2005.
Right. So this is before kind of PRs had kind of become obsessed with influencers, and they were kind of probably a bit more willing to offer you guys a pass into this event or something like that. There did seem back then to be a lot more encouragement for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, believe me, I was photographing a lot of student events as well, like Freshers Weeks, and I mean, some of the pictures I got from those things. I mean, if social media had been about, I would have been banned. I think I would have been banned from all the events because of some of the some of the images I've got kind of on a hard drive somewhere probably could end some careers. Type of people, the things that people
Yours,
get up to in their students.
yours,
No, not mine. I merely photographed what I saw. I didn't instigate anywhere. But yeah. So in a way, it was kind of an innocent time, and it was fantastic. Around the same time I started working for a small independent magazine called Diplo.
Mm-hmm.
They were set up by a wonderful man, Charlie Baker, who sadly is no longer with us, but was a real visionary at the time. He was a young guy who just wanted to create a diplomatic magazine about international relations and went into it. And I don't mean this in a cruel way, but incredibly naively, and in a wonderfully naive way, in the sense that there was an innocence to it and an excitement and just a kind of can-do attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And so that again was one of those small publications where I didn't really make any money for them, but it opened doors and it kind of got me into places and got me photographing things I wouldn't have had access to. And I mean, at that stage, having access to things is really, where the value lies.
Oh, of course,
because that allows you to slowly build a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the university ended, two things happened. One, I went to work in the West Bank. Or I went to do a workshop actually in the West Bank in a university called Birzeit University in Ramallah. But about a week before I went, the Israel-Hezbollah war broke out and our workshop was cancelled. But we had our tickets, so we didn't really know what to do. So myself and my friend who was a writer, we ended up buying some flak jackets on eBay and just going. I thought, well, sod it, we'll just go anyway and see whether or not there's anything we can do to cover what's going on up in the north.
Which is such a wild attitude now. Probably you think 20 years later, would you do that now? Probably not.
Absolutely not. No. I mean, I've got people who depend on me and I would never want to it's an incredibly selfish thing to do, but when you're 21, that's kind of, the bravado that you have.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of think you're bulletproof. So I spent a month covering that conflict in the north, in the northern Israel, which was far less dangerous than being in Lebanon, which, with the Israelis targeting kind of ambulances and vehicles and all sorts. And, to be quite frank, they've got a history of taking out people in the media. It's not controversial to say because you should look at the numbers of people in the last few years that have been killed. It's horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
We were in northern Israel, so in a way we kind of embedded with IDF soldiers, which was interesting in itself, and started to do kind of a story on that side of things and what it meant to be drafted and what that does to a society. So it was a really fascinating thing. I was working with a Canadian filmmaker and my friend Bert, who's a writer, and a weird kind of team of misfits that kind of some Vietnam vet who was there for the Christian Science Monitor, some guy from Mongolia that seemed to be there just for a laugh, and we were kind of like, some other guy from Portugal that was on the run from the law. It honestly was like, you could write a book about it. It was a mad time.
This sounds like a great film, literally.
So it was a weird time. It was a bit of a baptism of fire. And it cemented some things in my mind. In other ways, it kind of made me question a lot of things as well. So I can't say I came out of it going, yeah, this is what I want to do now. Mm-hmm. I think I came out of it realizing how hard it would be to make a living out of doing that, and realizing that it attracts all sorts of characters to that kind of line of work. But I did kind of get to experience that conflict that I was after, I guess. Mm-hmm. Where we were in Kiryat Shimona was taking 200 rockets a day. And there was all sorts of just mad situations we ended up in. When I finished covering that, I ended up working in the West Bank for a bit, and again saw stuff that was very uncomfortable and made me question a lot of things, but also have even more respect for people that put their lives on the line to cover these kind of things, because it's it's pretty unforgiving.
Yeah.
And you come back from something like that and you try to talk to people and no one's really that interested in it. And so I have a huge amount of respect for photographers and photojournalists who do that as a career, because it's incredibly tough. So I came back and I ended up interning at the Sunday Times on their picture desk, and that led me to my first job with the Sunday Times themselves. I then decided to go
was that your first paid gig then?
No, it wouldn't have been my first paid gig, but I think it was my first byline in a proper publication.
Right. What was the first paid gig then?
Oh, that would have been something at university. I started working for PR, marketing department in my university. So I started out on an hourly rate for them back in the day.
What was your rate?
I think it was about 60 quid an hour when I started.
Wow. That's proper. So when I did my, we'll get to mine obviously, but I found my first ever invoice the other day, charged 2 hours at £10 an hour. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was good with that. I mean, I did some pretty low paid weddings, and I took on I remember one of my early jobs was photographing a steam railway enthusiasts kind of group, which actually was it was amazing. It was just somebody that wanted me to come along and document their little club. And so it was a private commission. But the fact that they paid me to go and do that was amazing to start with. And great subject matter and lovely people. So yeah, I had a few...
You weren't distracted by it? You stayed on track? Thank you.
So yeah, I worked for the Sunday Times on a picture desk capacity. And then I found myself going to Costello in the run-up to their independence around 2007 to 2008. And I had a friend who was working there, so I was able to kind of bum a space on their floor in their apartment in Pristina, with the understanding that any time their landlord would come around, I'd hide in the cupboard. And I had a fairly...
Which looks infinitely more sus than just a man sat on the sofa than a man hiding in the cupboard.
Yeah, I had my clothes on. It wasn't...
Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Weird. But yeah, I spent a fairly kind of miserable month there during the winter, but I picked up an assignment for the FT. Ironically, nothing to do with the Cosman Independence. I ended up going and doing a travel feature in Tirana in Albania for them. And I also got a chance to work with a hero of mine, John Swain, who wrote the book River of Time about Cambodia, which the Killing Fields is based on. So he was sent out by the Sunday Times to do a story out there, and I hitched up with him. So yeah, I kind of basically, that was my journey. And then I came back from that, and I kind of started to find work in London, but I realized that to make it as a photojournalist would have been incredibly tough, and you've kind of got to base yourself somewhere really that's cheap to live and that's, that gives you access to these places. So for a long time, for a lot of people, that was Istanbul or Cairo. Now I don't know where it would be. I imagine it would be somewhere close to, somewhere in Eastern Europe that's close to Ukraine, maybe even Kiev itself. But obviously during the global war on terror, where there was a lot of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a lot of photographers who based themselves in Istanbul. And I just never had the cojones really to kind of fully dive into that and be fully 100% committed to it.
I mean, it's a life choice, isn't it? Like that's a full on, your life will never be the same after making that decision.
Yeah, you're not going to be picking up much PR work in Istanbul, I don't think. I mean, maybe you would be, I don't know. But I came back and I started to get the kind of commercial work that was better paid, and that allowed me then to take, a month off and go somewhere and shoot a project for myself. And I got into the habit of then trying to do that and just travel as much as I could. So I'd come back and I'd work and I'd save money, and then I'd backpack somewhere for a month or two and try and shoot, bits here and there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was there kind of a moment early on where, maybe it was when the FT kind of reached out, or was there kind of a moment where you suddenly went, oh yeah, I'm doing it. I'm making a living as a photographer. It was kind of like a
Oh,
milestone where you were like, "Yep, do you know what? I'm going to give
to,
this a proper go."
to be honest, not really that early on. No, I think I don't think that happened until later on. Probably about, so this would have been what, 2007, as I say, 2008. I think it was
Mhm.
probably not until about 2011 that I started to get regular work for a few agencies that, and doing NGO work as well. I was doing quite a bit of work for ActionAid and then Save the Children and Peace Direct. And so I was working a lot in Africa and Asia, and those were kind of became more regular gigs.
Mhm.
And that felt like, okay, once I'd got a couple of those more gnarly experiences under my belt, so to speak, you felt like, okay, I feel like I can justifiably say I'm doing it now.
Mhm.
But I think the thing with photography is, even now, 20 years into my career, it's not like you ever wake up and go, well, I can just rest on my laurels now. There's
No.
always more. There's always more that you can aspire to and that you'd like to do.
Mhm.
And you're always going to have a slight element of imposter syndrome. Of, yes, I've done that, but what am I going to do moving forward? So yeah. And I think but in terms of milestones, I guess, I think when I did my first job for Vanity Fair, that felt like quite a big step up, because that
Mhm.
was kind of like a big recognizable brand. Not that the Sunday Times and the FT weren't, but it felt like stepping from newspapers into something that was a bit more, I don't know, that,
Glossy.
yeah, maybe,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So obviously, you've then effectively a self-taught. You've never assisted.
So I assisted once on a job.
Oh,
Um,
this is going to be
uh,
this is going to be a good one if it's only just once.
well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think we touched on it previously on an episode, but I basically ended up going to the shoot, and I recently found these pictures, and I installed a thing called Peakto. I think we've talked about it before, and it's
Oh
allowed
yeah.
me to archive everything going back. And I stumbled across these pictures of this, well, it was a video actually, of this couple in what can only be described as a inflatable PVC pink pig gimp suit.
Two people,
And
sorry, in it.
one person in that, and another person in a kind of more conventional black PVC gimp suit.
Not how this
Um,
interview was going to go.
yeah.
Not
And
at all how I saw it.
I was the runner on set, and there was also a very rude series of taxidermy. I think there was a fox being filleted by a squirrel. There was a man in a loincloth who stuck a skewer through his scrotum and his face. Uh,
Is this for Bazaar magazine?
it was
Right.
it was a
Okay.
cover shoot, and it was like a big 3 or 4 fold cover shoot. So it's like, properly like folded out. So they were creating this huge panoramic image that needed
Right.
to hold the cover, but then also be able to extend out and be quite surprising as it extended out. So it was an
Yeah.
amazing undertaking. A lot of
There was an undertaker there.
I wouldn't have been surprised. A lot of balls to keep in the air for the photographer, and balls in general. I think that it just generally was quite a strange shoot.
Mm.
And I think it probably put me off assisting for a while. It made me go,
Well, you say
wow,
for
I'm not ready for this.
but you say for a while you never assisted again.
Yeah.
How long are you going to be off assisting, Greg?
I mean, I think now I'm open to the idea. I think I'm
Right.
ready now. But then, and it was a Holborn Studios, and I remember the photographer turned up in this massive like Humvee. It was a very kind of that editorial. The photographers were still kind of rock and roll kind of mentality,
Mm-hmm.
which you don't really see anymore as much anyway. Not on the editorial, maybe
No.
it's a bit in fashion, but yeah, it was all quite overwhelming and a bit just like, wow, I'm not really sure this is my world. So yeah, that did put me off for a bit. and I just went back to doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could see how that would be a bit of a an experience for sure. So you mentioned Don McCullin earlier.
Yeah.
Have you got anyone else that you kind of you looked up to kind of in the early days, or kind of any influences now, or kind of any people that you just so love the work, or the techniques or the methods? You're normally pretty good with that sort of stuff.
I mean, there's so many photographers. It'd be difficult to name them. I was really influenced by a lot of Magnum photographers back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I still love the work of so many of those photographers. I really like the street work and the color work of Alex Webb and Harry Gruert. I really loved the work of, it wasn't in Magnum, but Larry Burrows, who was a British photographer who was killed in Vietnam in 71, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But had shot some amazing assignments for Life magazine. Really cutting edge, mounting cameras on the side of Spectre gunships. They call them like Puff the Magic Dragon type. These huge gunships,
I know the one, yeah.
AC-130s. And he mounted a camera that showed the inside of it with the gunners kind of lit up in this red light that was the inside of the plane, and then the stream of bullets leaving the plane on the outside,
Right.
shot kind of at dusk. And I mean, the type of picture that even if you shot it now with like a remote camera, with all the tech that we have, it would still be an amazing and impressive image. And he was doing this in the late 1960s.
Yeah.
And he shot
with
these
pretty basic kit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember him saying in one of his books was a thing about how one of the lenses like rattled itself off his camera just because of the kickback on the M60 that was mounted to the side of a Huey helicopter, and he mounted the camera just the other side of the M60 to photograph the gunner, and was inside the helicopter setting it off manually with a cable release, and turned around and the lens had shaken itself off the camera, just fallen however many hundreds of meters down into the jungle canopy below. So
did he get it back?
He was don't think so.
No.
Although it's slightly macabre, but when one of the reasons they were able to work out where he was killed, because he was killed in a helicopter crash alongside Japanese photographer, American Ken Potter, I think it was, and oh gosh, I might have got this wrong. But there was a couple of photographers, Henuet, who was a French photographer. They all died in the same helicopter crash as over Laos. And one of the reasons they were able to identify the crash site many, many, many years later was they found the base plate, I believe, of one of his Leicas, and it still had the serial number in it, and they were able to trace it to the shop in Germany where it was bought.
Oh, interesting.
So that's how because they found it very difficult to find any human remains. But obviously the base plate of the camera had survived the kind of fireball of the crash site.
Yeah. Wow.
So a fascinating photographer, really ahead of his time, was shooting these amazing stories. And I think if there was any kind of photographer dead or alive, if you think about kind of fantasy photographer dinner parties, he would be somebody I would love to talk to. I just think his approach, even the way he looked and the way he acted, and from everything I've read about him and the way he behaved, he was a utter gentleman and very well respected, very meticulous, very understated. Just many of the kind of I guess many of the attributes that I look up to, because I think sometimes in photography, you can love somebody's work and then you can meet the photographer behind it and you go, oh, okay, this makes sense. They might be a difficult personality, but that's possibly why they're so good at what they do or how they get the pictures they get. But you might meet them and go, yeah, but you're quite an abrasive person, or could be quite manipulative person. Different people have different ways of approaching things, and you can't always tell from somebody's work what they're going to be like. But I feel like he wouldn't have let me down, if that makes any sense. I mean, maybe I would have been wrong, but
yeah, that's quite a nice legacy that he's left. Then, if that's how you've obviously read about him and read interviews and stuff, if that's how you feel coming away from those interviews,
yeah, I would love to. I'd love to read a biography of him. I'm not sure there's been one written, but if anyone gets a chance, I mean, Larry Burrows, the photo book from Vietnam, which is just full of some of his photo essays, like the Papa 13, where he spent time with I mean, that's the thing. He would follow characters and really have a central character to his story.
Mm-hmm.
And that made his story so much more powerful than other stuff that I was seeing, or other images that you see where there's single images.
Mm-hmm.
His work really was narrative based. And I mean, I think that was at the heyday of photojournalism in magazines, but that is something that really resonates with me, because for me, single images themselves aren't that interesting. I love to tell stories, and I love to tell stories with multiple images and use imagery to tell a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the power in it lies. So definitely he'd be up there with one of those people I would love to have met.
Nice. So you talked earlier about with personality types and how photography kind of attracts kind of all sorts of people from across the spectrum of personality types. If photography is going to mean something to everyone, what is it going to mean to you?
I think photography, what it means to me, in the sense of, I think you'd have to go back to what I was saying at the beginning about that first time you sit in the darkroom, you see an image of emerge in the developer. I think photography, to me, has always held this. There's something incredibly magical in its very concept, that you've got something that shows you a split second in time, and that is, through a chemical process and just through light and chemicals, that is preserved forever, like a small time machine or a little magical box that preserves memories. And I think that's very easy to kind of forget that in a world where it's, just constantly can film everything, and you open your phone and it can be shooting away at how many frames per second. It's very easy to forget that at its essence, in its most primitive form, there is something fundamentally magical about photography. And so the idea that you are preserving something and that you are choosing this moment over that moment is what holds its power with me and its resonance. And I think you really notice that when you photograph things that you really care about, whether or not that be simply photographing your children or your loved ones. The importance that this moment in time will always be preserved is really powerful and tangible. And I've told the story before, but it was a really profound moment for me, was looking at this photographer's book many years ago, where they described how 20 years of their life was in this book, but if you amounted everything in the book and counted it all up, it would be less than a second of time. And it just made me realize that, that what you choose to show is literally taking a scalpel to a timeline and saying this thin sliver of 250th of a second is important. And that particular spot that I was stood in on that particular day is the moment I'm choosing to show. That is hugely powerful to say, to have that power to say, this is what I'm choosing to show out of these situations. So I think, in terms of what it means to me, I guess it's that magic. That's what I never want to lose with photography. That's what that keeps me interested, because it's such a ephemeral thing. It kind of, it's fairy dust,
Yeah, I mean, photography is a tough career. So, is there anything else that kind of keeps you driven, or is it just purely the magic? Because I'm the same. The fact that it's a moment in time captured, nothing's ever the same. There might be similar frames, but nothing will ever be identical to the one you've just shot. And I find that fascinating, same as you.
I think for me, what keeps me interested in photography is really seeing other people's work. I mean, that's my biggest inspiration, seeing other people, what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. That kind of sparks off ideas in my mind. It's the fact that it's always been a great passport for somebody like myself who's curious, who always wants to be learning about things. It's like a great excuse to be a lifelong learner. It's a passport into areas I would never get to go into, or countries I would never get to go to. I mean, it's done me incredibly well over the last 20 years. And I think it excites me. It keeps me excited, because you never know what you're going to get. It's not like that you're going to nail a job. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, I'm not into fishing, but I think it's probably the same thing that, why people go fishing. It's the sense that the thrill of a catch, like when you've got something and you've got something with a good weight, it's like a really exciting moment. I think that's the same thing with photography. There are, there's just that chance, the addictive chance that you're going to strike it big and get something really important and powerful.
And hope you're not pulling out a boot.
Yeah, very much so.
So let's talk about jobs. So obviously you've talked about your travels in the various kind of areas of conflict, and various things. Have there been? I always hate this question, so I'm going to try and phrase it in a slightly better way. Has there been a particular job that you've kind of done and just gone, that was amazing? You've kind of come away from it and gone, do you know what? I absolutely loved. That'll live with me forever. That I'll come away,
Yeah.
or rather than just say what was the best job you ever did. Was there a particular one where you kind of came away, kind of going, every choice I've made in photography has led me to this point, and I'm glad I made them all.
I think, I mean, it's hard for me to pinpoint. There's a couple of contenders here. I did a job a few years ago for the Sunday Times in Sierra Leone, in the Bont Island, which is in the Shepro River Delta, which is kind of in a relatively remote area, about a couple of hours south of Sierra Leone. And I went out there to do a story on an oyster festival. But because of where it was and the remoteness, it meant that we were there for about a week, and it felt quite untouched in many ways. But because we were there for a good amount of time, it allowed me to have plenty of freedom to go out kind of at good times of the day when the light was good, and people got used to me being there and invited me in to see things. And I felt like I hit kind of a state of flow, where you're photographing. For me, it's rare that I find this, but like when you feel like you've got acceptance from your subjects, when you feel like the light is beautiful, the subject matter is interesting, and you are just kind of in this state of seeing the images everywhere and finding the compositions, and just that's the most exciting thing for me. I think I had it on that job. I did another one in Tanzania, which was on a hunter-gatherer tribe called the Hadzabe, and that was for the Fancy Fair. And that, again, was one of those jobs where you just kind of pinch yourself to be like, this is amazing that someone's paying me to be here to photograph this way of life, which so many people will never get to see themselves. It felt like a real privilege to be there, to witness it, to see these people doing what they do and what they're so amazing at doing, but is a dying out form way of life.
Sure.
Felt again like a real, just a privilege. So I think in terms of not necessarily the best images I got, although there are images from those stories that I'm really proud of, I think just the experience itself, the feeling of, what's the word I'm looking for? Genuine kind of appreciation and gratitude, I guess, for the fact that someone was trusting to send me out on a job like that and to send me to one of those places and give me the chance to actually do what I enjoy doing the most. Yes, that felt like, okay, this is perfect. This is everything coming together.
Yeah. How when you go out and do jobs like that, I've had various things like that as well. You come back, and then for me, the blues hit. I kind of go, I then might end up going and doing, a week of jobs that I don't really want to do.
Yeah. I think it's hard. I think when I remember doing an NGO job out in Central African Republic, and it was a really tragic time for the country. They just entered the civil war, which is still bumbling on, and in no small part thanks to Wagner, that were there for quite a few years before they disappeared. And whatever is left of them is still probably there because the Russian involvement was quite big. But when I was there, it was very early days, and it was quite it was a horrific time for the people of that country, and we ended up in a couple of quite grim situations. And a week later, the thing is, in those things, you have to you remember, like, I'm the privileged one because I can leave, and the people there can't. They're stuck with it, and So the guilt from being in those situations is quite real and hard to get your head around, because you just feel like I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be observing it, because it just doesn't seem fair. But at the same time, it's like, well, I am here. I'm here right now, and I'm seeing what I'm seeing, and people need to see this.
It's
but I remember,
it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think nowadays, like, I think there's a whole, essays you could write about this, and the moral quagmire of photojournalism, documentary photography in those situations, and white gaze and all sorts of things. Like it's a very tricky area to navigate. But I remember, when we got evacuated out of the country on an aid flight after having been trapped in for far longer than we were meant to be, because our passports got taken whilst we were there, and it was all very complicated. A week later, I was photographing a ski wear campaign in the Dolomites, and I just thought, none of this matters. None of this. This is just point. Like, they were worrying about this thing and that thing, and I just found it really hard to kind of get my head out of the fact that, like, literally last week I was witnessing people in their last dying days, and now I'm here trying to make your clothes look good on the slopes of, in the lap of luxury. It just felt so disconnected, and
it's two very separate lives, isn't it?
Different worlds. Yeah. Very different worlds, and the job of a photographer or anybody who's kind of documenting or working between those worlds is kind of slightly chameleon-esque. You do blend into your environment, or try to, as best you can, but of course that has side effects. And I think so I think, I can't really remember what your original question was, but I think that disconnect is quite difficult sometimes to contend
I didn't
with.
even know if there was really a question. It was more just, I guess, how do you feel it? Obviously, you're a very compassionate guy, so I knew you would do. But it's, having done not things to the same level as you've done, but slightly similar things, it never leaves you as well. When I remember when I'd gone out and lived in a refugee camp and come back after that, the following week I was photographing a band who were kicking off about, there was a mark on one of their shoes, and he was like, I need new shoes. And I was like, you need perspective, my friend. That's what you need.
Yeah.
So that was actually the last band I ever worked with.
I think in a way that's a privilege that photography gives us as well. It gives us perspective, because you are being trusted to be an observer of the world and all the good and the bad that comes with that. I mean, the beauty and the horror. I mean, it all mixes up. There's light and dark to everything. Yeah. But I think that's a privilege that comes with the territory, and you have to be prepared for that.
I mean, you've done some amazing things. People probably listening to this and being like, oh, bloody hell, that is alone like quite a career, and you're not really, you've not even got started yet. So, but it would be lovely to know, because you've been doing this, what, 20 years, 22 years?
I guess I started around 2005, 2006. Yeah.
Right. So,
About
I'm not
21
going to do the
years.
maths, but some years. Yeah. What would be, after everything you've shot and all of your experiences, what's the dream gig?
I think the dream gig is anything where I really enjoy jobs where I am going and I've got something to document that is going to be happening regardless of whether or not I'm there or not. That's important, because it's one thing going and photographing something that's going to happen whether or not you're there or not. It's another thing going and then being like, well, we don't actually do this till next week, but we can show you what it looks like. It's just like, that's not really the same. But getting stuck into something that's happening. And I always look back at, say, and you had these kind of big assignments that would have been happening in like 1950s, 60s America, where somebody was sent round, I don't know, the Midwest to photograph the harvests or something like that. I think a story on global agriculture, or labourers that work the land, I think would be a fascinating thing to go photograph. To be able to travel around and document that in multiple different countries. I love the idea of photographing stuff that unifies people, i.e. it happens in multiple different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
but is very physical. And I do think it's kind of interesting as we move into an AI age and a digital age, the idea of documenting people who do physical or manual labor or any kind of manual movement, really, because I don't know, maybe I'll get this totally wrong. Maybe when the machines take over, that's all that will be left for work, will be
So
basic manual labor for people.
they'll
But
be the pioneers. They'll be the trainers who train
yeah,
everyone else to do it.
but there is a sense of being able to photograph something like that where there's something already going on. Because for me, it's almost like a dance. It's a bit like being on the street where you see somebody like Joel Merowitz, for example, another amazing photographer that has been an influence. When you see somebody like that working, they are moving around situations like a dancer would.
Mm-hmm.
It's very graceful, but it's energetic, and it's you know that if you just move over one little step to the left and crouch down by 10 centimeters, that's the frame. So I love working around situations like that. That's when I'm most likely to get into my flow state, is
Mm-hmm.
when there is something going on. The light is there, the activity is there, and I have the permission to be there in the sense that no one's just stopping and staring at you.
Mm-hmm.
That you can just get on and do the work and create images that are authentic and feel authentic. I mean, there's lots of arguments to be had over how authentic something's going to be if you're there with a camera. But yeah, so in terms of dream gig, it would probably be anything like that, where there is something real to really get my teeth stuck into, but visually stimulating.
Because obviously the passion for you is still in the travel work, but what we haven't really covered is that you're an incredibly talented portrait photographer. We've talked a little bit about it. You've got some absolutely stunning and just very lovely portrait work, but you've also shot some interiors. You've shot some still life stuff. I've seen some food stuff from you. Is there an area of photography that you might be interested in testing out, expanding into, or you kind of feel that maybe you're kind of in a decent place and you kind of feel that within all of that, every kind of creative itch is scratched?
I don't know. I think I enjoy pushing myself and experimenting, because I think that's where growth happens, on those kind of fringes of what you're comfortable with in your comfort zone. That's where the growth happens. And that's where the magic can sometimes happen, when you're doing something that you're not necessarily classically trained in, because you don't know the rules, so you can tend to break the rules. I'd say it'd be difficult for me, because I have tried most things. I would be interested in doing a bit more. I would love to do some more experimentation with older forms of photography, like wet plate collodion. I enjoy experimenting with the visual medium in terms of playing with the way of taking pictures, and I guess I'd love to get back in the darkroom properly. Something I keep telling myself to do. I have a friend in our studio is actually in this building who has a color darkroom, and I've got stacks and stacks of negs going back years that I would love to explore and see how they would come out printed. I just always find excuses not to do it. I'd be interested in shooting a bit more fashion from now and then. I love the work of, somebody like Tom Craig. I have a lot of time for, because that's somebody who's come from a very kind of documentary background, and has really brought that into his fashion work and shoots stuff in a very observed way. But I think it has a real magical quality to it and a real lightness of touch. And I mean that in the best possible way. It feels playful, and kind of fantastical. And I really admire that. And I think what's interesting about photography is you can really admire photography and photographers that are so different to yourself, and there's work you have no interest necessarily in recreating yourself, but you can look at it and you go, wow, that's amazing. You look at, say, somebody like Tim Walker, who used to shoot loads of really kind of fantastical scenes for fashion magazines back in the day. very big in the 90s, huge sets that they'd create, and kind of one, it must have worked for some amazing set designers. And it's not something I want to go and take myself, but I look at it and just have nothing but respect for it, because I just think it's so wonderful and playful. So yeah, I that's not the best answer, really. There's a few areas, but
no,
yeah,
it's pretty good. Now, listen, we've talked a lot about jobs, work, and kind of paid for assignments. Can we talk about personal work? Because obviously, as photographers, hugely important. What sort of percentage of, and I'm sure the answer will be same as it is for most photographers, is I don't do enough and I wish I would do more. But like, what is the kind of the amount of percentage of time, I guess, that you're able to devote to creating personal projects? And do you shoot 50-50, or do you shoot 90-10 in the way of commercial, or how does it work for you?
so not enough is the short answer. It's probably 20-80.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say the difference is that because I shoot quite a lot of editorial, I tend to treat the editorial like it's a personal project. So I will quite often go above and beyond to photograph it in the way that I want to be able to create a body of work that I can then create a small project from.
Yeah.
And what I love about editorial work is that quite often it gives me the access to a story that I wouldn't have had. It might give me access to a story I wasn't even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like an opening of the door. And sometimes that allows me to then go back and revisit certain characters or certain subjects. But, like I try to, as I said, I try to treat editorial as if it was a personal project, and really make sure I create something that I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I don't feel bad about not doing purely personally instigated projects from scratch, because I feel like I'm already scratching that itch to some degree with the commissions I'm accepting and taking on in the editorial sphere.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible way of doing it. I assume also the picture editors are probably thrilled with that kind of approach.
Well, I think like when you start to create the work from certain assignments that you're really interested in, that shows, and then you're going to be hired to do those types of jobs, So I've kind of made a bit of a niche for myself in documenting events to a certain way, or documenting stories in a certain way, that then I will get hired to kind of create that look or that feel, that same approach to a story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least I think that's why they are. Maybe just because I'm very polite on email, I don't know. But I'm not. I'm really not polite on email, actually.
I can vouch for that.
Far too gruff on email. I'm actually much nicer in person. But yes,
I can also vouch for that.
but yeah. So I guess if it's that whole thing, if you shoot the work you want to do, and you create a name for yourself in the work that you want to do in it to some degree, like that's a dream anyway. Well, I do think that's changing because there's less editorial work out there. So I do think you have to instigate it. But I have I have a colleague who I share a studio with, who shoots a lot of video, and he's worked for all sorts of clients over the years, and now he's just like, you know what, I just go out and shoot my own little cuts just purely to go on the gram. But I shoot it in exactly the way I want to do it, because I'm done with kind of, just trying to produce something that is looked at by a client and is kind of generic. If I'm going to do it for myself, I'm just going to do it as weird and wonderful as I want to do it, and do enough of it, and someone will see that and go, that's what I want.
Yeah.
And hire you for it, So I do think that's true. That's still true, that you need to be producing work that you're really happy with and putting that out there, because that's what's going to get you the further jobs which line up with your own values and your own approach to work.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the dip in editorials, and obviously there's less of them kind of around now. What other, what is the part of being a photographer? Because there are quite a few challenges. I don't know if you're aware, but what would be the thing that you find the trickiest or the hardest about being a photographer?
Marketing, probably.
Yeah.
I say hardest. I mean, it's not hard to market when you've got stuff you're really excited about showing, but the level of consistency of marketing that you need these days, it's not just good enough to be doing one or two projects a year and kind of putting it out there. You've got to almost be feeding the machine the whole time with things.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you don't. I mean, there are very successful photographers, such as Zed Nelson, for example, who won the Sony Photography Awards for his amazing project on, natural habitats and
Mm-hmm.
the way that they're changing, and has shot some amazing projects in the past, like Gun Nation and Love Me, and these kind of long-term projects. And it comes again from a editorial background. I think as somebody who probably, you feel like, oh, I hadn't seen his work for a while, I wonder what he's doing. And then suddenly he's back and he's got this amazing body of work, and he kind of like dumps it down, wins a competition, and then goes off again for a few years and don't hear anything of him. And I think I've got so much respect to somebody that can do that. I think for a lot of other people, it's kind of the daily hustle of putting stuff out there to be able to get the work. And I think I find that the most exhausting. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of doing my accounts, if I'm honest.
No, I'm with you there.
Chasing up admin side of things is pretty dull. Never been into retouching. I mean, I tend not to retouch my work. I barely retouch my work at all.
Humble brag.
It doesn't really fit. Well, no, but it doesn't fit with what I do. Like, sure. With portrait work, it may be, but I don't shoot huge amounts of portrait work like yourself. I'm not kind of shooting stuff that's going to be blown up to billboards, that you need to be worried about kind of this, that, and the other. It's so a lot of it, I kind of, if it's not there, it's not there type thing for me. And especially because of having a documentary background, I've always been a little bit more reticent about retouching my work too heavily, because you start doing that and people start questioning everything you're shooting.
Of course.
It doesn't really align with my,
modus operandi.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say my standards, but I guess what I mean is my moral standpoint on these things, perhaps.
No, that's fair enough. And so we talked a lot about work, personal work. Is there, we all do work, right, that doesn't make the portfolio. It's the bread and butter stuff. Do you do a ton of that, or is there kind of, are you mainly at a position now where you're able to shoot what you like?
I'd love to say yes and no. I'd love to say that I'd love to say that I did do bread and butter work. I don't do as much as I would like. But I think that's changed and gone through. There has been periods when I've had, regular gigs, or regular clients that wouldn't necessarily be something that, like, I'm not necessarily going to be putting corporate headshots up. But there's been, during COVID, I had a corporate headshot gig for a very large investment firm that kept me going financially through that period, and it was maybe 7 shoots throughout the year, but they were well paid. It was like a £40 billion company. So
I thought you were going to say job. I was like, bloody hell.
I would be here. I'd be on my private island. It was those kind of jobs, they're good, but I wouldn't say I've got regular bread and butter. It really changes, So yeah, okay. No, I'd like some.
So I feel like we've just tipped past the hour mark. I feel like now is a decent time. I personally have loved this. This has been fascinating to me. So thank you very much. I've learned some stuff. Well, I've learned lots. But I would love to, you and I do chat about this a lot, so I'm fairly certain I know what's coming. But it would be great to hear your thoughts on what the future holds for photography, how you think it's going to go. Is it all doom and gloom? How do you feel about it?
We're fucked. Bye.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Greg.
Sorry. No, I think my thoughts on the future of photography. I think the fundamental thing I mentioned at the beginning, like the power of photography to the individual, I think will always remain. What's really difficult to predict is in 10, 20 years, how are we actually going to be looking at images? It's very likely that we're going to be putting on headsets or maybe just have chips in our eyes or on our glasses or whatever. And we are interacting with images that are in a 3D sphere. So the idea of a printed or 2D image becomes very antiquated. And when you think about that, then you think, well, why would it be a picture and why wouldn't it be a slow-mo video or a movement? So photography in its purest form will probably be slightly relegated, I think, because there will be things that we can't yet imagine that would have replaced it in terms of how we interact with the idea of memories.
Right.
I still think that there will be visual mediums that visual people can be involved in, but equally, if we're really looking 10, 20 years, 30 years down the line, how much of that is going to be done by people versus machines? I don't know. I think there will always be room for people that want to create images, and I think there will be room for people with archives of images. There will be an interest in that to some degree. But it will probably be quite unrecognizable with what we have now. And
so you feel good about it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still doing it, right? Because I enjoy the process of it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want my kids to be looking at it like it was something that they were going to be able to do as a career.
Sure.
I think it will become a craft that will be cute, maybe. You know, like the idea of, in the same way, actually, really, that film photography is now to some people. You know, it's kind of like it's a bit of a gimmicky thing that people kind of like, oh, wow, I could shoot film, and you send it off to the lab and you get pictures back. And you're like, yeah, I remember that when that was the only way to do it.
Just that was just photography.
Yeah, but now it's got a nostalgic tint to it. And I think photography will still maintain that kind of magical hold over people. But whether or not you can make a career out of it is going to be hard to say. But, you know, the idea of curating images, the idea of having a visual aesthetic and a taste, you know, will still be there. It's just that, you know, that will be based on your experience, I guess. And hopefully by that point we'll be long in the tooth enough to be able to say, in my day. But at the same time also have, you know, the kind of the cash to check in some ways of having had that experience to be able to say, oh, this is how this is my way of seeing the world. It has some kind of value. But it's a difficult one. I'm looking forward to you answering this question on the next episode. So we'll start thinking about it.
I've kept. I wanted to. It's
how to dry.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it's an odd one. Obviously, having to interview you, I've obviously tried to dial back. But listen, it's been great. I've loved it. I've loved literally every single answer. You're very articulate, and you're a very smart and gentle presence. I think I'm a bit of a brute, and you are not. So I think we work well. But listen, it would be great to let's round this up properly. Where can people find you?
Okay.
Not like, you know, actual location, but where if they open
right
their
now,
web browser.
Just outside of Brixton on a Wednesday night, about to go to the pub. No, so I can be found. My website is http www.gregfunnell.com, which is GregFunnell.com, and Instagram is just my name again, so it's Greg Funnell. And same for Threads, and anything else. I mean, there's not many Greg Funnells in the world. I think there's one other guy in the UK, and he's a physio. So occasionally I get calls from people asking them to sort out their backs, and he probably gets calls from people asking them to shoot his wedding or something. I don't know. But...
and the funny thing is, you both take the jobs.
But yeah,
That's the mad thing.
we
So
play a game to see how long it is before people realise we're not the right Greg.
well, that I can't wait to tell you about the other Tom Barneses. So, well, listen, that was a lovely chat. Well done, good job. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's such an odd one, isn't it? You know, we normally
Yeah.
do these together, so it's a very odd. You know, this is I think episode 84.
Yeah.
So I feel like,
And I have to say, we were a bit reluctant to do them, but we were not making up that we were asked to do them by our patrons. So I can't remember.
sure,
who...
yeah, we were
Yeah.
we were asked. No, we genuinely were. So I yeah, because it does. If you didn't know about the Patreon, it's like, oh, have they run out of?
We've
have
run
they
out of
interviewed
guests.
everyone? No, actually, I think it's a nice refresher as to who we are, and I think you're more interesting than I am. Not to dumb down.
I don't think we'll. Don't bother tuning in next week, folks.
Well, exactly. Quite now that I've really built it up. No, you've had such a storied career, and you've been to some absolutely fascinating places and shot some beautiful work.
Well, the wonderful thing is, I guess we've got such different paths through. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also so much that where our strengths and weaknesses are different to one another, and I think that's what makes the podcast work, because our experience levels are so different to one another in terms of our not experience levels, but like our experiences in general.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some similarities, as we'll discover, but I think that's what makes it interesting, right? We're both in the same profession, but we've got very different backgrounds in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's interesting. I find it interesting, and that's why we do it, right? Well, listen, Greg, thank you ever so much for taking the time to come on the show. Sorry,
yeah.
How'd you sign this off? Sorry, it just feels hilarious. Cool.
Yeah, I can't wait to grill you.
Crikey.
Right. Well, that bombshell.
Right, I'll see you next week.
Yeah. Take care.